So, the highly anticipated Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is here. And it's safe to say that so far, this series has proven to be a fan favorite when it comes to the MCU. For me, in terms of my prior relationship with the Guardians of the Galaxy, I guess, I've greatly enjoyed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies so far. They haven't necessarily been my favorite of the MCU, which I think is partly due to just a preference of tone and I guess my own personal biases. For example, I'll always look forward to like a Spider-Man movie more so than a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I guess. I tend to gravitate towards the Earthbound heroes more than I do the cosmic end of the MCU, I suppose. But okay, quick recap. The original Guardians of the Galaxy, which wasn't even titled Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, it was just Guardians of the Galaxy. It was a very unique thing for a comic book movie to be, and I think one thing I absolutely appreciate about it is that it brought comic book movies with a warmer, happier tone back into vogue. It was a bit less nihilistic than the rest of the MCU leading up to that point, particularly when juxtaposed with Marvel Studios' other release in that respective year, 2014, we had Captain America the Winter Soldier before Guardians of the Galaxy. And yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy was a very refreshing change of pace. The characters in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 to me felt very much like the sort of the Disney archetype. Like with Rocket Raccoon and Groot, you've got very much the Timon and Pumbaa of the movie. Star-Lord and Gamora very much reminded me of Fry and Leela from Futurama. And I do just quickly want to clarify, this is coming from someone that has never read a Guardians of the Galaxy comic whatsoever, so I don't know how much these movies share in common with their comic counterparts, but I thought Guardians of the Galaxy was, at the very least, a really good movie, quite light, quite basic in terms of characterization, and particularly with a very weak main villain in Ronan the Accuser. I've heard some people say, yeah, he's just an over-the-top mustache-twirling villain, but I didn't find him to be anywhere near over-the-top enough anyways. I don't need a villain to be complex, I need it to make an impression, and Ronan just didn't make an impression on me. I didn't think Guardians 1 was bad by any stretch, but Guardians 2 I definitely preferred. We shifted focus over to other characters like Yondu. We saw a bit more of the lore, a bit more of Star-Lord's origins. Ego was a great villain. Huge glow up in the villains department. And of course, really enjoyed Kurt Russell in that role. Guardians 2, yeah, it felt like these characters had matured up a bit. They're also obviously a very big part of Infinity War and Endgame with the original Gamora dying. We got their cameo in Thor Love and Thunder, which felt like a massive obligation. And then we got the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, which was charming, cute. It reflected a little bit on, like, you know, what happened with Gamora and Peter Quill's upbringing, and I think these characters have really matured over time. They were never bad in the first place, but they were kind of that very safe place sort of Disney archetypal hero characters. It was all very Futurama, which again, I must stress, it's not a bad thing, but I do think that over the course of these movies, the Guardians of the Galaxy really grew much more into their own thing. It's kind of hard to believe, though, with how many Guardians of the Galaxy appearances we've had, that the last Guardians of the Galaxy theatrical release movie was 6 years ago. Where has the time gone? Also, Guardians 1 is 9 years old. 9 years later, we are now getting the conclusion to that story with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, the Guardians kind of represent to me the cosmic end of the MCU, but it must be said, like, okay, the MCU where we're at now, there's obviously, okay, right, we gotta say it, MCU fatigue in my case. Too many releases per year, too many TV shows, and not enough quality and not enough focus on characters. I've made a whole video on where I think the MCU is really slipping going into Phase 4 and 5. But also another thing worth noting is that the MCU as a whole, since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, has gone more cosmic now. We've had Infinity War and Endgame, which brought the Avengers to a cosmic level. Loki, again, that was a very cosmic project. The Eternals, I'm yet to really see that properly, but if I understand right, yeah, it's one of the more cosmic end of the MCU, but also we're seeing more ground-level heroes like Spider-Man and Ant-Man going a bit more cosmic in multiverse adventures. And of course, the Quantum Realm in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It was a very Star Wars-y thing. So with cosmic stakes, scopes, settings being kind of par the course for the MCU now, does a Guardians of the Galaxy movie really justify itself, and how does it do that? How does Guardians of the Galaxy separate itself as still that kind of B-side to the MCU that it was originally meant to be? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. But also, just how good of a film is it, too? So, yeah, that's the plan anyway.
Hello there, I'm Captain America, and I'm here to give you a PSA. Now, if you love your country, you'll want to subscribe to Channel Pup. If you don't love your country, Well, that's just too bad. But you can still subscribe anyway. Commies welcome. And of course, actually, we'll talk about that. But of course, nothing comes free in this country, except for freedom. And no exception is the Adobe subscriptions that Channel Pup needs to make these videos. So be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. And God bless America.
Now, there is kind of a fair bit riding on my enjoyment of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 because, well, we're gonna jump over to a different comic book universe for a second here. James Gunn is obviously the writer and director of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Now, while this has been a B-side to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he is going on to become the head honcho, the lead producer over at DC Studios. He's going on to write and direct Superman Legacy, the brand new Superman, and there's quite a bit riding on that for me because Superman is one of my all-time favorite superheroes. I loved what Zack Snyder did. This is replacing that, so I kind of want to be able to have faith in James Gunn. With that said, Guardians of the Galaxy 1, 2, and the holiday special, all great stuff. And I love what he's done for DC so far as well. I think The Suicide Squad 2021 and Peacemaker are great entries into the DC universe, like some of the best that they've got. But it's like, this is his final project. It's got to be a send-off for James Gunn's sort of area of the MCU. And as well as that, I really hope to have a little boost of faith in James Gunn's DC universe after this. And there are a few things that could be indicative of that. So first of all, yes, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 still feels like a kind of a B-side to the MCU. It still feels different to what the MCU is doing, even though the greater MCU is still going for more cosmic stakes and cosmic settings. This still feels different. Why? Because it puts its characters at the absolute forefront. That's not to say that there haven't been MCU movies recently that have done that, but they're certainly rarer. And I think that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 of all of the post-Avengers Endgame projects is the one to put the most stock into its characters of all, even though there have still been more character-focused entries. This is the one to go furthest with that, and I mean, go figure, you've got an ensemble cast when it comes to the Guardians of the Galaxy, so there's gonna be more of them. But like, this is still James Gunn's movie. And what James Gunn does really well is working with characters, making you engage with characters that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily engage with. I mean, if you recall, when they announced the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, everyone was like, Guardians of the Galaxy? They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel this time, huh? Now they're a household name, and that is in no small way thanks to James Gunn and his character-centric style. Which is good, this is just what we needed, because the previous MCU movie was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, if you saw my review of that one, you'll know that my biggest criticism was that that was a film that just seemed disinterested in its characters. It was more interested in the stakes, the implications, the greater story of the MCU's multiverse saga. Now, for one, there's no multiverse stuff in this movie, thank God. But secondly, yeah, it's no exception from the other Guardians films. This one invests in its characters. And with a send-off like this is obviously the finale of this era of the Guardians of the Galaxy as we know it. You want them to do the characters justice. You want to have your time with them and make it count. So I'm pleased to say that yes, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 absolutely succeeds at that. Now, it is very difficult to talk about the story of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 without delving into spoilers. I'll give the best synopses that I can without spoiling anything. Star-Lord is still kind of coming to terms with what happened to Gamora in Infinity War, and how there is a new Gamora out there, but it's a very different character. This Gamora is still very much her own person, even though she is the same person. And at this very low place in his life, at this time of being very emotionally compromised, Star-Lord has to lead the crew into a mission to save one of their own. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does have a lot of moving pieces. Atop the fact that, yes, this is an ensemble movie, so there's just a lot more lead characters this time, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has to deal with the loss of Gamora, the main story, that main quest, and exploring the origins of Rocket Raccoon. And those three things are all pretty sizable tasks, but I have to say that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 balances these things really well. They're all very well interweaved. I recall James Gunn saying on Twitter that he had an idea for a Rocket Raccoon spin-off movie, which he eventually integrated into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I was like, so we're getting two movie ideas mashed together here. That's rarely a good sign, but It does weave organically. You could not tell one of these stories without the other. Now, I mentioned that the characters have matured up a bit in this one, and that a lot of these characters are in a bit of a darker place because of the events of Infinity War and Endgame. From the get-go, yeah, there's definitely kind of a sense of kind of solemn finality right from the start of this film. You can tell from the start that this is going to be a much more intimate, far more introspective story. With that said, if you are hoping for a big space quest, well, you're still absolutely getting that, arguably the biggest version of that here. So one kind of critique that I've kind of had of the MCU is that things do tend to breeze past really good stories. Like, while I said that I haven't read any of the Guardians of the Galaxy comics, I still do have like an awareness of Rocket Raccoon's origin story, and when I heard about this, I was like, man, I wish we could have seen that rather than skipping right ahead to the Guardians of the Galaxy in the first place. Of course, a Rocket Raccoon movie would be very difficult to sell in 2014. Guardians of the Galaxy was enough of a hard sell as it were, even though it was a smash hit. So I was thrilled to see that we would be tapping into the history of Rocket Raccoon in this movie. Which is great, because I always enjoyed Rocket Raccoon as a character, but from more kind of that Timon and Pumbaa kind of perspective. This time, after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he's a much better character now. He's honestly one of my favorite MCU characters at this stage. Not only is he that kind of lovable wild card, but like there's a lot more to him now that you know his past. And you kind of realize the pain that he has been kind of carrying with him and hiding behind that kind of larger-than-life personality that he exhibits. Rocket Raccoon, as we know him, gets a lot less screen time in this one, but he does still end up being a main character. He does get time dedicated to him through the flashbacks, where we see much more of a younger Rocket Raccoon. So it's got to be said, yes, Rocket Raccoon's origin story has the potential to be some of the best of what the Guardians of the Galaxy has to offer, and it's safe to say, yes, they have saved the best for last here. I mentioned that these Guardians movies are very character-driven, and this is arguably the most character-driven of the bunch. The Guardians are not doing any work for like a client here or anything like that. That main quest that they embark on, that's something they undergo for one of their own. They are doing this for one of their friends who they clearly love and care about very much. And each character gets a chance to shine here. For starters, we see how these characters are all willing to go to the very ends of the universe for someone they consider family. Obviously, this makes for a compelling story with compelling characters because they're doing a selfless act, but we see how far Quill is willing to go, how emotionally connected he is with his other Guardians of the Galaxy, but we also see how he's able to mature up as well. We see what these characters' real purposes are in the greater scheme of things beyond just the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I gotta talk quickly about Nebula as well. How far she is willing to go for one of the members of the Guardians of the Galaxy after previously being an antagonist. She's come such a long way, but not only that, she's freaking badass. Nebula was easily one of my favorite characters in this film, just for how far she's come, how much she's developed. Now, something I was worried about is not only has the original Gamora been killed off, but we now got this kind of Gamora 2, this Gamora of another timeline, another past. This is a very different person because she's been shaped by her experiences. A more morally grey Gamora that worked alongside Thanos. I was really worried that what we'd be getting is just kind of kill one Gamora off, pop another one out, business as usual, and I am so relieved to see that that's not the case. It doesn't feel like a forced thing either, like this character's different for the sake of it. Everything here is handled really tastefully, especially kind of addressing that Peter Quill and the original Gamora were in love and kind of how that works now with this new Gamora. Whether Peter can kind of reignite that flame or not, it's all dealt with in a surprisingly healthy way, which I was relieved to see. So then we've got our villain, we've got the High Evolutionary. And we've just got to talk about the High Evolutionary. So we had, Ego the Living Planet in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and that was a really good villain. That definitely set a new standard for MCU villains at the time that he came about. This time we've got the High Evolutionary as our main antagonist. Now, obviously, it was going to be quite difficult to top Ego as far as Guardians of the Galaxy villains go because of Ego's involvement in Star-Lord's origin story, his very close ties to our main cast. Fortunately, the High Evolutionary definitely lived up to Ego. First of all, the performance by Chukwudi Iwuji is fantastic. He's a scenery chomp-in villain, he's a total scene stealer, but it has to be said, this is by far the most despicable MCU villain to date. That doesn't mean best, although that is definitely debatable, but never before have I wanted to jump in on the action and shoot the crap out of an MCU villain as much as I have here. The High Evolutionary is just that cruel, and it's not just like, you know, the cruelty he enacts, but also the target of his cruelty, his victims, who they are. I despise this guy, and I think, like, if you are not a psychopath, you will despise this guy as well. Which again, feeds into this being a very compelling story. We've got a character that the audience also want to get the beat down on as well. In terms of other new characters, we've also got Adam Warlock, who, okay, that's quite a big deal because Adam Warlock is quite a major cosmic Marvel character. And they cast Will Poulter in the role, who is obviously not a very conventional pick, but I honestly enjoyed him a lot. I enjoyed this character. Now, he's quite an immature guy. He's got very much kind of the mind of a child, but in a sort of a Superman-esque kind of body and power level. And I believe that this is much more reminiscent of his very early run, and I get the feeling that we will be seeing more of Will Poulter as Adam Warlock. I get the feeling we're going to see him mature over time, just as we have the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy here as well. But this was more kind of a tease of things to come with Adam Warlock. I think this film did a really great job in regard to not missing any opportunities within its story. Everything here feels very carefully crafted. All different avenues that they could take these characters feel carefully considered. Visually, the film is gorgeous. The CGI never took me out of the moment, which is pretty unprecedented for post-Endgame MCU. The visual effects were pretty seamless just across the board. The action as well was very visceral this time as well, which made me really happy. You could tell when every shot was landing. It was all very impactful. It really feels like it stepped up from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 in terms of how the action is done. I was quite surprised by kind of the violent content in this one as well. This film gets very violent in very different ways, in ways that I'm surprised that they were allowed to do. I do quickly want to talk about a subplot involving Cosmo and Kraglin. Now, this subplot, you could tell where it was going from the very beginning of the film. And that is something I will say about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This film is very tropey in places and very predictable as well. And yes, these predictable tropes are predictable and tropey, and I would be impressed if the film was able to actually surprise me, but at the same time, this film is incredibly unapologetic about how predictable and tropey it can be. It seems to kind of make no bones about it. It all feels very much by design. It feels like they still went for kind of the best possible outcomes for these stories, and it's like, if it's predictable and tropey, it is what it is. This is just the right way to take these characters, and I do get a sense of that. I just wonder if there were ways that they could have maybe diverted things a little bit or misdirected a little bit, you know? Also, we have these other animal characters in the Rocket Raccoon flashbacks. And I did wonder if these animal characters were, I guess, a bit basic in terms of character. But here's where I kind of stopped myself on that train of thought. They're animals, mate, at a very early stage in their sort of evolutionary process, if you will. While, yes, they are able to speak, they still act like the animals that they are. They exhibit the personalities of those types of animals. You want an otter, it acts like an otter. You want a rabbit, it acts like a rabbit. You want a walrus, it acts like a walrus. They're not as multifaceted as, say, a human being because they are not human beings. There's a sense of innocence and ignorance on clear display when it comes to these animal characters, which is just true of animals in general. And it's kind of necessary that they did keep it that way, and I won't reveal why. Also, not that it needs to make news or anything, but this film did make news for having Marvel's first F-bomb. And I'll say this, it was handled nicely, it wasn't overly broadcast or anything like that, or kind of wink and nod into the camera. It just felt like, yes, that is organically where you would drop an F-bomb, so fair enough. I also just real quick want to talk about the music in this one as well. So, we do have an instance where the third film in the trilogy is not scored by the same composer as the previous two. Such is life with a lot of MCU projects. Tyler Bates does not return to score this one. Instead, we have John Murphy. Now, with Tyler Bates, I thought on a whole the soundtracks were very... I thought the main theme of the Guardians just felt too similar to the Avengers theme, and yeah, used those same two chords. And it just ended up feeling like kind of like a, can I copy your homework? Sure, but change it up a little bit, you know? But I thought Tyler Bates excelled really well with like emotional moments. For example, Yondu's death. For Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I think John Murphy brings it a far more distinctive sound. It's a more emotionally driven and action-heavy film, and John Murphy's score absolutely fits the bill for that. This score sounds a lot closer to The Suicide Squad 2021 than it does the Guardians films, which, go figure, The Suicide Squad 2021 was scored by John Murphy. Also, we gotta talk about the Awesome Mix. I don't know if we're calling this Awesome Mix Volume 3 or if it's just Peter Quill's Zune, but yes, we got another mix of tracks, and we go a bit more into like the sort of the 90s and 2000s with this one. It's clear that between like these awesome mixes and Groot growing up that James Gunn loves his time delineation. But yeah, the mix this time is really strong. Some great tracks for the action sequences, that's all I will say. Alright, so kind of wrapping up on, I suppose, the spoiler-free section of this review. Overall response to this is, boy is it nice to have a Marvel film that made me feel again. Guardians of the Galaxy exhibits what the MCU does best, putting characters at the forefront and treating the adventure and action as more of a stage for them to perform on. The action and the adventure is secondary, the characters come first. And that's what the MCU does best, that's what James Gunn does best. So you've kind of got this match made in heaven, there's that pedigree on display here. And yeah, it's done even better, I would say, than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which already handled its characters really well. I'd say post-Endgame, this feels like the largest and most event status that an MCU film has felt. Like, there were times when I felt kind of flashbacks to how I felt while I was watching Avengers Endgame. That sense of this being an ending for this story and these characters. That sense of I'm with these characters that means so much to me, and we're doing this one last hurrah for them, you know? And so yeah, it's a very emotional film. Like, you know, obviously you'll get a lot of laughs out of a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and they're certainly there. They're never intrusive though, which I really appreciate. This one isn't so much a ha-ha funny Guardians of the Galaxy comedy movie, so much as it is more like this very emotional sort of character space opera drama thing. Like, this is really approaching a lot of different genres in one go here, which works really well. And fortunately, it doesn't feel like the comedy takes precedence over anything else. It's just kind of in there. No big moments being undercut by it. Like, put it this way, you don't have a Thor Love and Thunder issue here where the comedy is just at the absolute forefront of the film. No, James Gunn handles his film with a great deal of sincerity, which is what makes it work. I'd say as far as post-Endgame projects go, this one sits more in the leagues of, say, Spider-Man No Way Home and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, where they're more character-led movies that are just better, in my opinion. I'd much prefer movies like this to films like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, or Thor Love and Thunder, or Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which admittedly I did like, but like I don't like love it as much as I do, say, like the more character-led ones. Again, Marvel, lead with your characters and not with your implications. Problem is though, like Endgame, I don't trust them to leave this alone. Like, Endgame felt like a finale, but then in the MCU just kind of kept on going, and I fear that the Guardians of the Galaxy are going to do a similar thing. Obviously, James Gunn said he's not coming back for any more, but I get the feeling we will be seeing a Guardians of the Galaxy 4 from a different director. And I'm not really sure how I would feel about that. I think it's good to let things end, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a really strong ending for this. And if they do intend on doing more, then this does feel like a solid jumping off point. I mean, this is definitely one way to end it on a high note, that's for sure. And yes, I will say, between the fact that this one has a lot less comedy in it, how visceral that action gets, how Adam Warlock was handled, in terms of the physicality and the special effects and everything like that, I am so ready for James Gunn to make a Superman movie. And I really look forward to seeing what James Gunn will do next with DC. Yes, I'm going to answer a question ahead of time. Jennifer Holland, James Gunn's wife, is in the movie. And this does stir up quite a bit of, like, heated discussion. I know that there are people on the internet that hate the fact that James Gunn keeps casting Jennifer Holland in his movies, even if it is just little bit parts here and there. Their blood just boils at the sight of her. And guys, look. Every director has their frequent collaborators. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're family. Like, nobody seems to mind seeing Ted Raimi and Bruce Campbell in Sam Raimi films. Nobody seems to mind seeing Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter in Tim Burton films. Nobody seems to mind seeing Cillian Murphy, Michael Caine, and Morgan Freeman in Christopher Nolan films, or Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio in Scorsese films. And I noticed that no one ever talked about Sean Gunn getting cast in a lot of James Gunn movies. But we draw the line at Jennifer Holland? Get a life, man. Holy shit. Like, I could understand if, like, all of the main cast in all of his films were the exact same from film to film, but having, like, a bit part reserved for friends or family or whatever is just commonplace. Heck, I'd say this is less egregious than some of the ones I've mentioned before, so, like, again, it comes from, like, bitch-eating crackers syndrome when it comes to James Gunn. It's just that parasocial, everything this man does is terrible mentality. Guys, I miss Henry Cavill and Zack Snyder as well, but I'm kind of, like, socially adjusted, so this isn't really an issue for me. Alright, so now we're kind of gonna go into like an off-the-cuff spoiler discussion for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So if you just want to watch the spoiler-free section, then, like, my overall conclusion, yeah, it's good to have a hearty, well-made, director-driven project in the MCU once again. I'm not saying that we don't have any of those, like, we definitely got, like, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, for one example, but they do seem to be fewer and far between, and it's nice to see that what made the Guardians of the Galaxy great has not withered away by the time we get to the third movie. If you like the other two, you'll love this one, and it brings their stories all to a great conclusion. I'd also go as far as to say maybe it's recency bias talking, but this is my favorite of all of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies by quite a long shot. So yeah, that wraps up the spoiler-free section of this review. Now let's talk spoilers. And I'm gonna begin with something completely piffily unquantifiable and just impossible to pass off as any kind of objective criticism, but something that kinda irked me a little. Star-Lord never got his classic helmet. They went as far as to put everyone in their classic uniforms, but they never had it with the classic Star-Lord helmet. That just feels like a missed opportunity, especially when there's a moment in the third act where he's floating towards nowhere trying to get home, and he's running out of oxygen in space, and it's like, if only you had a helmet here. It was never James Gunn's intention to include the helmet, and I don't understand why. The classic helmet, in my opinion, was always way cooler than the MCU version, and they got the classic outfits here. All they had to do was stick a helmet on him for one scene, and god damn it. Okay, yeah, that's a very, very, very minor nitpick. So Adam Warlock was the creation of the Sovereign, and they've been after the Guardians of the Galaxy since Volume 2. So they send Adam Warlock to nowhere, and he just decimates the place, and nearly kills Rocket Raccoon. And Rocket Raccoon seemingly can't be saved because of the mechanical parts inside him. And they have to kind of override those protocols, so they basically need to get something from the High Evolutionary in order to save him. As they're on the way, they find out all about Rocket Raccoon's history. And that's where we get the flashbacks. There's a great moment of humility in there that I absolutely loved, where Nebula says that everything the High Evolutionary did to Rocket Raccoon is far worse than anything Thanos did to her, and we know what she's been through with Thanos. So what is it that makes the High Evolutionary such a dickhead? He abuses, experiments on, and tortures animals, including Rocket Raccoon's 3 childhood friends who we do get to know. Lila the otter, Teefs the walrus, and Floor the rabbit. And when these guys all get killed by the High Evolutionary, and just the child Rocket Raccoon's pained response to this, and how he wants to kill the High Evolutionary, I was rooting for him all the way. We understand now Rocket Raccoon's penchant for violence. But it's like, yeah, if you've got a little bit of a weak heart when it comes to seeing animals in turmoil, animals in pain, yeah, this film is gonna hurt. There were a lot of people sobbing in the cinema, and yeah, it was all incredibly emotionally engaging. Like I myself, I'm not really a crier when it comes to films, and again, that's not because of some macho man thing, that's just, I don't really process things that way. But it all hit, like, if I was a crier when it came to movies, then yeah, I would cry. But no, I felt the heavy heart, you know, I felt the lump in the throat. And we see what the High Evolutionary's been working on, and we've got this counter-Earth. A replica of Earth made to be perfect, with highly evolved animal creatures. But whenever that Earth proves to not be perfect, High Evolutionary just decimates it and starts again. He's an incredibly callous character. And it kind of feeds into the kind of philosophy that if God is all-powerful, then he cannot be all-good. To create life, you must be willing to destroy it. To kind of take control of a world, you have to be kind of callous. But I loved all the scenes on the Counter-Earth, and just seeing Star-Lord's response to all of this as well, as someone who grew up on the original. And I love how the Guardians originally set out just to save Rocket Raccoon, but once they find out everything he's been put through by the High Evolutionary, They basically declare war on the High Evolutionary. But also just all the people that work for the High Evolutionary as well. That entire organization are just the worst people we have encountered in the MCU so far. Like, you're not only rooting for the Guardians of the Galaxy because you like them, because they're willing to go to the ends of the universe for Rocket, you're rooting for them because you want to see some animal abusers eat shit. And yeah, you will get that. There's also the big climactic scene where Nowhere is piloted to the High Evolutionary ship, which gave me Endgame vibes because Nowhere is kind of a sanctuary for all of the characters that we've grown to know and love over the course of the Guardians movies. They're essentially getting their very own little Endgame event where you've got Kraglin and Cosmo getting involved. A tasteful little vision of Yondu as well, might I add. And again, Cosmo and Kraglin, it's all super predictable. Kraglin doesn't know how to use the whistle spear that Yondu used. Cosmo's got a bit of friendly rivalry with him, and then he calls her a bad dog, and then by the end, he's able to use the spear, and he calls Cosmo a good dog. Again, very predictable stuff. But I love Cosmo. Cosmo's so cute, she ain't kidding. Oh, hell yeah, she is one noble guardian of the galaxy. And I'm so glad we met her after Infinity War, because if she perished in the snap, I just couldn't take it. Now, a lot of people are kind of betting on who's gonna die in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and I was kind of able to predict that nobody does. The trailers would lead you to believe it's Rocket, but I mean, Rocket, you know, is incapacitated for most of the film, but I kind of knew that was gonna be a misdirect. They wouldn't put a dude's death clear as day in a trailer. None of the Guardians die, but they all go on to pursue new destinies. And there's some really great ones in there, with Rocket Raccoon becoming the leader of the new Guardians of the Galaxy. Again, all the more reasons why I don't trust them to just leave this alone and let them, you know, sail off into the sunset. Nah, we're gonna get a Guardians 4 with this new lineup, which includes a classic comic book Groot as well, which is awesome. Star-Lord goes back to Earth to see his grandfather, which again, a really nice way to end that. I was always kind of a bit disappointed that in Avengers Endgame, Star-Lord seemed to have kind of no reaction to being back on Earth, and we do at least get that here. But it does call to the question, like, why didn't he have any reaction to Earth in Avengers Endgame? Bizarre. But hey, better late than never, right? But I think my favorite destiny that any of the Guardians would embark on after this film was Drax. So earlier in the film, they're setting these kids free, but they speak a language that Nebula and Mantis cannot speak, so it's up to Drax to help them out, and he speaks that language, and he's really good with the kids. They've rescued the kids now, and they basically just say to Drax, your destiny was never to be a destroyer, it was to be a dad. And given what Drax went through in Guardians 1 with Ronan killing his children, this was a really wonderful end for him. I was kind of half hoping that the High Evolutionary would take even more of a beating than he got. Like, I was hoping Rocket would kill him. But at the same time, we sacrificed that moment of catharsis for a moment of growth for Rocket, where he finally accepts himself as a true guardian of the galaxy. He is this film's main character, and this film kind of treats it like the Guardians of the Galaxy series was always his story, and I don't know how much I buy that, as we do follow Star-Lord quite a bit more in the first and second ones, but I mean, Rocket's always been a very major component to those films, so I mean, look, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 only works out better for it, so hey. But as I said before, like with Ego, like we had a villain that would tie in directly with Star-Lord's origins. In this one, we've got a villain that ties in directly with Rocket Raccoon's origins with the High Evolutionary. So nothing's really lost. So that's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I don't think you could ask for a better trilogy of Guardians of the Galaxy films, and I don't think you could ask for a better ending either. This is about as good as you could ever hope for. Is it a bit predictable and tropey in places? Yes. Does it lay it on a little thick in terms of emotional stuff in places? Yes. But that's as far as I can really get criticism-wise for this one, and even then I'm not even sure if those two things are necessarily bad things. Especially like with the second one, I like emotional moments in films, you know? That's where I think I'm gonna leave this though. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is a great film. Go see it. If you want your name in the credits of my videos, that can be arranged for as little as $1 a month. However, for the $10 patrons and above, we get a literal shout-out. So, shout-out goes to Cale Bennett! That Jordo! Ken K! Legendary Ray Ray! Dr. SP with your PSA for the day! Yes, I'm a real doctor! You can't prove anything! Sangio and Cyrus the Skeptic! And then in the $5 tier, we've got Broski, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Council of Geeks. Thank you so much to you, generous bunch, and as for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day. I'll catch you next time.